For centuries, sailors whispered about them in darkened taverns, their voices trembling as they recounted tales that would make even the most hardened seafarer question their sanity. Walls of water so impossibly tall they seemed to scrape the very heavens, appearing from nowhere and vanishing just as mysteriously. These weren't just stories, they were warnings from men who had stared death in the face and lived to tell about it. But science laughed at these tales, dismissed them as folklore, relegated them to the same category as sea monsters and mermaids. For over a century, the scientific community maintained an unshakable belief that such phenomena were physically impossible. They had their equations, their models, their absolute certainty that the ocean could never produce anything so catastrophic. They were wrong, catastrophically, dangerously wrong. Welcome to a journey through one of the most shocking reversals in scientific history, where legends became reality and mathematical certainties crumbled like sandcastles before an incoming tide. This is the story of how we discovered that nature had been hiding one of its most terrifying weapons in plain sight. The year was 1819 when French naval officer Jules Dumont d'Urville made a claim that would haunt him for the rest of his career. During an expedition in the Indian Ocean, he witnessed something that defied every scientific principle of his time. A wave, he insisted, that towered over 30 meters above the surrounding sea. Not just him, but 3 other witnesses saw this liquid mountain rise from the depths like some awakened titan. When d'Urville returned to France and shared his account, the response was swift and merciless. Scientists ridiculed him. Politicians mocked him. Even the French Prime Minister publicly dismissed his claims as the ravings of a man too long at sea. The ridicule was so intense that d'Urville's reputation never fully recovered, and for nearly 150 years, the very concept of rogue waves disappeared from scientific discourse entirely. But the ocean doesn't care about human skepticism. It continued to unleash its fury on unsuspecting vessels, creating mysteries that would puzzle investigators for generations. Ships would vanish without a trace, leaving behind only scattered debris and unanswered questions. The most advanced vessels of their time, built to withstand the worst the sea could throw at them, would simply disappear as if they had never existed at all. The transformation began in the 20th century as steel-hulled ships replaced their wooden predecessors. Suddenly, the survival rate of extreme maritime encounters improved dramatically. More sailors were living through encounters that should have killed them, and their testimonies began to accumulate like evidence in a cosmic courtroom case against scientific orthodoxy. Between 1969 and 1994, 22 massive cargo vessels were destroyed by impacts with waves that weren't supposed to exist. 525 people lost their lives to phenomena that science insisted were impossible. Each tragedy added another crack to the foundation of established wave theory, but the scientific establishment remained stubbornly convinced of their mathematical models. Then came December 12, 1978, and a ship that would change everything. The MS München was no ordinary vessel. Stretching over 240 meters in length and standing 30 meters tall, this cargo ship represented the pinnacle of maritime engineering. She had been specifically designed to handle waves up to 15 meters in height, and was considered virtually unsinkable by every expert who examined her specifications. At 3 a.m, as most of the world slept peacefully, the München's crew sent out a distress signal from somewhere in the turbulent waters of the North Atlantic. The message was brief, urgent, and would be the last communication anyone would ever receive from the ship or her crew. Hours later, when rescue aircraft arrived at the coordinates, they found nothing but empty ocean stretching to the horizon. What followed was the largest search and rescue operation the North Atlantic had ever seen. 13 aircraft circled endlessly above the waves, scanning for any sign of life. More than 100 cargo ships passing through the busy shipping lanes joined the desperate search. For weeks, the ocean kept its secrets locked away beneath the surface, offering no clues about what had happened to one of the most advanced ships ever built. Months later, a single lifeboat finally washed ashore, and what investigators discovered sent shockwaves through the maritime community. The life rafts hadn't been lowered by the crew as standard emergency procedures would dictate. Instead, they had been violently ripped from their mounting points 20 meters above the waterline. The steel hinges that had secured them to the ship were bent backwards, twisted into impossible shapes by forces that exceeded anything in the engineering manuals. The implications were staggering. Something had struck the München with enough power to tear apart reinforced steel components designed to withstand hurricane-force conditions. The forensic evidence suggested a force so extreme that it challenged every assumption about what the ocean was capable of producing. Yet even this devastating loss wasn't enough to convince the scientific community that their fundamental understanding of wave physics might be flawed. The breakthrough that would finally shatter centuries of scientific certainty came from an unexpected source. In the frigid waters off South Africa's coast, photographer Philippe Lejour captured something extraordinary in 1980. His camera had recorded what appeared to be impossible. A wave that towered far above its surroundings, a liquid skyscraper rising from the ocean with terrifying majesty. But photographs could be dismissed as optical illusions or camera tricks. What science needed was hard data, irrefutable measurements that couldn't be explained away or ignored. That evidence would come 15 years later from one of the most hostile stretches of water on Earth, where a simple laser measurement would rewrite the textbooks and force humanity to confront a terrifying truth about the planet we call home. The Norwegian Sea had always been known for its violent temperament. This relatively shallow stretch of water, running only 100 meters deep, churns with such fury that massive oil platforms must be anchored directly to the sea floor to prevent them from being swept away. On New Year's Day 1995, while the world celebrated the arrival of another year, the crew of the Draupner oil platform was about to witness something that would change maritime science forever. The Draupner platform's downward-pointing laser had been installed as a routine safety measure designed to monitor sea conditions and ensure the structural integrity of the massive installation. This sophisticated equipment tracked wave heights with mechanical precision, recording data that would typically show the predictable patterns scientists had studied for generations. On this particular morning, as hangovers plagued revelers across the globe, the laser detected something that should have been mathematically impossible. 25.6 meters. The number appeared on the monitoring equipment like a digital harbinger of scientific revolution. To put this measurement into perspective, the surrounding waves were reaching heights of only 11 meters, making this anomaly more than twice the size of anything else in the immediate vicinity. According to every calculation, every model, every theoretical framework that had guided maritime engineering for decades, such a wave simply could not exist. The engineers who had designed the Draupner platform had performed exhaustive calculations before construction began. They had determined that once every 10,000 years, the North Sea might produce a wave reaching 20 meters in height. This figure had been built into their safety margins, incorporated into their structural designs, and accepted as the absolute upper limit of what nature could produce in these waters. The 25-meter giant that their instruments had just recorded wasn't merely unexpected. It was theoretically impossible according to every scientific principle they understood. This single measurement, captured by an automated laser system in the middle of a winter storm, accomplished what centuries of eyewitness testimony had failed to achieve. It provided undeniable, quantifiable proof that rogue waves were not maritime mythology, but scientific reality. The data couldn't be dismissed as sailors' tales or photographic anomalies. It was raw, unfiltered evidence that the ocean possessed capabilities far beyond human comprehension. The ramifications extended far beyond academic curiosity. If waves of this magnitude could appear without warning in waters that had been thoroughly studied and modelled, then every ship design, every offshore structure, and every safety protocol needed immediate re-evaluation. The linear wave theory that had guided maritime engineering for generations was suddenly as obsolete as navigation by star charts in the age of GPS. Within months of the Draupner measurement, the maritime world began experiencing a cascade of encounters that seemed to validate the existence of these oceanic behemoths. The Queen Elizabeth II, one of the most prestigious passenger vessels ever built, was struck by a 27-meter wall of water while crossing the Atlantic. The impact was so severe that windows in the Grand Salon, positioned 21 meters above the waterline, were shattered by the collision. The captain later described the approaching wave as resembling the White Cliffs of Dover, a comparison that speaks to the sheer scale of what they faced. 3 years after Drapner, another incident would demonstrate the far-reaching consequences of these oceanic monsters. The cargo vessel Tokyo Express was navigating standard shipping routes when an 8.5-meter rogue wave struck without warning. The impact was violent enough to breach the ship's cargo hold, sending 5 million Lego pieces cascading into the Atlantic Ocean in what would become known as the Great Lego Spill. The environmental implications of this disaster continue to unfold decades later. Beachcombers along the coasts of Cornwall still discover colourful plastic fragments washing ashore, silent reminders of nature's ability to redistribute human artefacts across vast distances. The irony wasn't lost on investigators that many of the scattered Lego pieces were themed around sea creatures, as if the ocean had chosen to make a pointed commentary about humanity's relationship with marine environments. But perhaps the most extraordinary rogue wave encounter occurred in November 2020, when monitoring equipment off the coast of British Columbia recorded something that defied every previous understanding of these phenomena. A wave measuring 17.6 meters in height struck a research buoy near Ucluele, but the measurements revealed something even more shocking than its absolute size. This wave towered 3 times higher than the surrounding water, creating a size differential that exceeded anything previously documented. Scientists had established that rogue waves needed to be at least twice the height of surrounding waves to qualify for the designation, but the Ucluelet wave shattered even these expanded parameters. Local news stations described it as a once-in-a-millennium event, though the increasing frequency of such occurrences suggested that these time estimates might be as flawed as the original theories about wave formation. The scientific community now faced an uncomfortable truth. Their mathematical models, refined over centuries of study, had fundamentally misunderstood the ocean's capabilities. The linear wave theory that suggested waves were predictable, measurable phenomena was crumbling under the weight of empirical evidence. But if the old models were wrong, what was actually happening out there in the vast expanses of open water? The answer would require scientists to venture into realms of physics they had never applied to oceanography before. Wave formation, they discovered, wasn't the simple, linear process they had assumed. Instead, the ocean operated according to principles that seemed almost mystical in their complexity, where multiple waves could interact in ways that concentrated enormous amounts of energy into single, devastating events. Constructive interference became the first piece of this puzzle. When multiple waves travelling at different speeds and directions converged at precisely the right moment, their combined energy could create temporary giants that dwarfed their individual components. Like synchronized swimmers creating a human pyramid, these waves could stack their power to achieve heights that none of them could reach alone. Ocean currents added another layer of complexity to the equation. When storm-generated waves encountered powerful currents flowing in opposing directions, the interaction could compress wave frequencies and force multiple swells to merge into single, massive formations. The Gulf Stream and Agjolhas Current became particular areas of concern where these interactions occurred with terrifying regularity. But the most unsettling discovery was that rogue waves could form in areas completely removed from obvious triggers like currents or converging weather systems. In the middle of seemingly calm ocean expanses with no apparent cause, these liquid mountains could rise from the depths like awakened titans. The explanation for this phenomenon required scientists to embrace concepts from quantum physics that suggested randomness played a far greater role in wave formation than anyone had previously imagined. The story of rogue waves represents one of the most humbling chapters in the history of human knowledge. For generations, we dismissed the terrified testimonies of sailors as mere folklore, confident in our mathematical certainties and theoretical models. We branded eyewitnesses as liars or madmen, destroyed reputations, and ignored mounting evidence that our understanding of the ocean was fundamentally flawed. Today, We know that rogue waves are not only real, but far more common and dangerous than we ever imagined. These liquid monsters continue to prowl the world's oceans, capable of appearing anywhere, at any time, with forces that can obliterate the most advanced vessels humanity has ever constructed. They remind us that nature still holds secrets we're only beginning to understand, and that the line between science and legend is often thinner than we dare to admit. The next time you find yourself on the open ocean, remember that somewhere beneath the surface, forces beyond our complete comprehension are at work. The waves that seem so predictable, so manageable, can transform without warning into walls of water tall enough to scrape the sky. We were wrong about rogue waves for centuries, and that humbling truth should make us wonder what other impossible phenomena are hiding in plain sight, waiting to rewrite everything we think we know about our world.